Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the meeting. Okay, I just sent out an announcement for the class. This is MIS 4477 and MIS 7397. What I'm going to do for those of you that are in the grad level, I've got some grad level students that are concurrently taking this. I'm going to schedule some additional Zoom meetings at some different times so that we can discuss a couple of projects I'd like the grad students to work on to get, to satisfy the grad levels. Classes are supposed to be harder for you, right? Good. So, can you guys all hear me okay? You know, always check that. Type something if you can hear me. Like yes. Okay, good. Sent out the announcement, got a little bit of homework. Now we're going to get to the actual assignments that I posted in the previous semester, but for right now, I want you to just work on these items that I'm throwing out to you dynamically. I will finish up changing the schedule this evening. I was not able to finish last evening. I also need to edit the video from yesterday, so for those of you that did not attend class yesterday, you'll be able to go watch that video on YouTube. The password will be the same as the password for these Zoom meetings. Go Cougs. So we'll have plenty of time to get the schedule done for the exams. And again, the exams are online, so that's less critical. Their first exam, I plan to make it available by next Thursday. Okay, so we're going to spend this first week looking at several things, setting up the virtual machines, or you experimenting with your virtual machines. I'm going to set them up, and then I'm going to have you access your virtual machines remotely. As soon as I can figure out, like I said, the best way to do that. Using Chrome Remote Desktop is typically what we have done in the past. Excuse me. However, as some of you know who've used Chrome Remote Desktop, you have to log in to the host machine with your Chrome, your Google account first, and then run the Chrome Remote host software. Then you go log into another computer with Google Chrome, and you can remote view your host computer. So we're going to have to use something like TeamViewer instead, where I can set up a generic number for you to use instead. Having said that, I do want everybody to have some experience with using Google Chrome Remote. I know not everybody's used it. Some of you have, some of you aren't familiar with it or haven't used any remote viewing software. And Zoom doesn't count. Zoom is not a remote viewing software. This is teleconferencing or data conferencing software, data conferencing app. Chrome Remote, neat product. There's also GoToMyPC. There is a generic, and a lot of them are based on a generic app, a generic open source app called VNC. So I'd like you to go Google for, you don't have to do this right now, but go Google for what is VNC remote viewing. And you can even download the VNC app. It comes in two different flavors. It comes in the client version and the server version. If you want to remote view a computer that you have at home or at your office, you would install the VNC server version. And then on your laptop or your cell phone, you would install the VNC client version to view the server. Okay, so like I said, I'll get, I didn't have enough time last night because I had a deadline for setting up that COVID-19 lab that we're working on. All the good stuff showed up today. Anyway, let me remote view a screen here, or share a screen, excuse me. Get it up first. Oh, here they are. Things are running just a tad slow today. Let's see what this one looks like. Okay, so this is the, let's just go ahead and get into this. There was a couple of more slides left in the previous PowerPoint, but that's okay. That's less critical. And that is published right now on Blackboard. So you could go look at that on your own. It's just the last few slides are mostly posing some hypothetical questions and what kind of things we need to look at, things that are trending for the future. This is the augmented chapter 1, or the adjusted chapter 1 PowerPoint. Can you guys see it okay? On my screen there. Actually, before I get into it, like I said, VNC, I want you to read up a little on what VNC is. Real VNC is where you can download that program. There's several versions of it because it is an open source piece of software. In other words, it was developed under public licensing. So any company that wants to can download it, modify the source code, and do whatever they want with it, repackage it, as long as they're giving away their program for free. And the way they make their money is you subscribe to services, monthly service subscription. I like the Type VNC viewer, and that's probably what I will use when I'm building your virtual machines tonight. I'll probably install that, and then I'll make the code that you use something like your student ID and your initials, something along those lines. Let me decide the best, most secure way to do that, and then send that to you. But in the meantime, you could go ahead if you wanted to and download the client version of VNC. And if you have 2 computers at home, or access to 2 computers, if you want to go ahead and start experimenting with this, you can download the client version on one computer and the server version on another computer and experiment with remote viewing on your home network before you get to this point. I find that remote viewing is very, very powerful stuff. I've been doing it for a long, long time. I can work pretty much anywhere in the world as long as I have a device and internet access. Been doing that, like I said, a long, long time, so that I can be sitting on a beach in Mexico As long as I've got a cell phone, I can control servers, reboot things, you know, do whatever it is I need to do. Normally, if I left a file open on my desktop or I needed to look up some data or documents, I can remote view it. And I think most of you have had some sort of experience, or at the very least, you understand the value of that, particularly now with COVID-19, where we have to be working at home. How many people think that we're going to be back at school in the fall? What have you guys heard so far? Anything? Yeah, I'm hopefully believing that we will be back in the fall. But sometimes some of you guys hear other rumors, or you hear things I don't necessarily hear. So let me know if you hear anything to that effect. So anyway, VNC, and it doesn't have to be tight VNC. The nice thing about VNC viewers is once you install a VNC server, a VNC client from Real VNC or Tight VNC or just the original VNC, the VNC source code, which you can download yourself and use, they're interchangeable. There's an Apple version. And actually, before I start the PowerPoint, let me go ahead, since I'm here on a browser, show you the two tools or the two applications I would like you guys to download. And again, this is assuming you have computers that you have the ability to install software on. If there's anybody that doesn't have access to a computer, let me know. And I'm talking about computers that you can download apps on. Advanced IP Scanner. If you Google for Advanced IP Scanner, isn't that great? I love it. These days you can misspell stuff in Google. I misspell stuff all the time because I'm a fast typer. And Google still fixes it for me. Advanced IP Scanner. Download that program. I promise it's not got malware in it. At least I haven't found any yet. It's a free download. And run that on your local network. Or better yet, go to a place like a Starbucks or go some public place and run that, and it will give you a list of all of the IP addresses that it finds. You can narrow it to just a range of IPs, or you can tell it to scan for everything, and it'll give you, and again, you won't be able to find everything, but you'll be able to find computers that are not properly locked down. But has anybody seen this program before, or does anybody know what the concept of IP scanning is? First of all, does everybody know what an IP address is? I have to assume that. I should not assume that, but I have to assume that everybody knows what an IP address is. There's two versions of IP, but IP version 4 address. Let's see, where's my word pad? Hang on one sec for me. IP address. That is a unique number that your computer needs to talk on a network. Now, most of you probably have an IP address right now as something like 192.168.0. something or other, or maybe you've got 10.0.0. something or another, or maybe you've got 10.1.10. something or other. So your first bit of homework, and this is something that you do need to submit. I'll fix this in you may not see it right now in Blackboard, but your first bit of homework is a very simple thing to do, which helps begin to teach you IP addresses. 4 things I want to know. And the Advanced IP Scanner can actually help you with this. Close that or minimize that for just a second. In the homework, I asked you to tell me what your local IP address is of the device that you're currently using. This can be the cell phone that you're using or your laptop. I prefer, to be your laptop. And I'm not going to do anything with that information. I'm not going to hack you. In the case of Windows, there's several different ways to get it. I like to do it the old-fashioned way, go to the control panel and look up the networking information. It's actually easier than this, but I like to do this way so I can show you guys other stuff. It says I'm on the, oh, that's right, because I'm on a laptop right now. So it says I'm on this wireless network. I can click there. I get a box that looks something like this. Now on an Apple, it's not quite the same, but it's similar. And if you're not sure on an Apple how to do it, you can just Google for how do I get my IP address. And if I click on details right there, this will tell me that my IP address for this device I'm using, my laptop here, is 192.168.10.102. There's another thing here called a net mask, which we're going to learn. We're going to learn all of this stuff. If you don't know what these items are, that's okay. Most of you know what IP address is, but you may not know what a net mask is. You may not know what a gateway is. You may not know what DHCP or DNS are, but we're going to learn all of that stuff. So this is a good beginning. Look and see what your own internal IP address is, your net mask and your gateway, and you're going to submit that on homework assignment 1. You can just write it in the comments field and submit it that way. You don't need to make me a document like this here. So let's look at something here. So my IP address is 192.168.10.102. My gateway looks very similar to my IP address, but it starts with a .1. This is going to be true probably for 99% of you. The gateway address is going to be the same first 3 octets, 192.168.10 in my case. Like I said, for you, it's going to be 10.1.10 or 10.0.0 or 192.168.0. That .1, that's pretty standard, but some of you might see something different there, like a .254. It's some other number. It's the number of the device on your network that attaches you to the internet. We call that device a gateway because that's your gateway to the internet. Now here's another thing I'm going to want you to do. I want you to tell me what your public IP address is, because this IP address here, that 192.168, that's kind of like the telephone number for your computer, but it's not a public IP address. It's a private leased IP address. If you want to know what your public IP address is, that is what the world thinks your IP address is. You can go to whatismyip.com, and it'll give you a probably, not always, but probably a different number. My public IP is 192.138, not 168, but 138. That is a true public IP address, 194.45. Or you can go to ipchicken.com. 192.138.194.45. That is actually the IP address of the device that I'm attaching to that's actually speaking to the internet on my behalf. It's my proxy, okay? In 99.999% of the cases, that's what you're seeing. Your private address and your public address are not the same. So do that little bit of homework first. And while you're doing that, or right after you do that, go download this advanced IP scanner. Run that on your local network. It might take a few minutes, and it'll look for all the devices on your local network. Depending on how busy your local network is, how many smart devices you have in your home, you might find a lot of stuff. You might find nothing if it's a small network, or if you have a very secure network. Or you might, like I said, find a bunch of things like printers and smart devices and TVs, and maybe you'll find stuff that you didn't know was in your home or in your place of business. The MAC address, let's just talk about that because that's also in the homework. The MAC address, Microsoft likes to call that the physical address. If I go back to this screen, this physical address, line 4 right here, that is a unique number which is hard-coded and given to your computer, usually by computer manufacturers. When you bought your computer, that number is hard-coded on a chip inside your computer or your cell phone. I lost my chat window. Hang on, where's the chat window? Oh, there it is. Do Friday. Yeah, just do whenever you can get it. But yeah, you should be able to do this. This is a 10-minute assignment. It's a very simple assignment. And then adding the advanced IP scanner and advanced port scanner is a few minutes more, but make it as long as you want. Play around with it. I love to play with this stuff. I go to people's homes all the time, show them this, and I run this on their local network, and they are surprised to find that there's stuff in their house they didn't know about. Sometimes we've actually found that people's neighbors have been using their Wi-Fi, either their guest Wi-Fi or their Wi-Fi didn't have a good password. Getting back to the MAC address. So this address is uniquely assigned to a manufacturer. The first 6 numbers, this, in my case, that 247703, that usually will define the manufacturer of the device I'm using, 24.77.03. So you can go Google for MAC address search. And there's a few different searches. I don't like the Wireshark one. I like this Arul John one. So let's just go here. Once you get that information of your Mac device, or your device, type in the first 6 bytes there, 247703. 247703. And then click look up MAC address. Hello? Turn off your mic.
तमाम लोग जो हैं वो उसका इज़हार कर रहे हैं वो इनकी वजह से सारा का सारा
I gotta mute you. Arsalan, was that you? Okay. So this tells me that the computer that I'm using, or at the very least the network card which is installed in my computer, is built by Intel. I'm actually using a high-end HP laptop, but I'm using a wireless device inside the laptop built by Intel. If you're running a Mac, this will probably say Apple Inc. there. If you're running a Dell, this will probably say Dell there. Very, very useful stuff. Now, the cool thing about this advanced IP scanner program is that it has that MAC address lookup built into it. So it'll give you a list of all these different IP addresses that are in your local network, and it will attempt to look up the manufacturer. This is very useful for somebody like me who is doing network troubleshooting. We're trying to find stuff. If we know that we're having trouble with a particular brand of something, like I installed a Ubiquiti wireless access point in a network, but I couldn't figure out what its IP address was. So I ran this program, and it came up as manufacturer Ubiquiti, among other things, but it was the only thing on the network. Told me what the IP address was, and I was able to log into it that way. Very neat program, I think. Very eye-opening. They also make an advanced port scanner. Advanced port scanner, same company. What a port scanner does is you can also give it a range of IP addresses, or you can give it one specific IP address. In fact, you might want to do this. Download that program, and then in the search box up here, put the IP address of your local computer, your own computer, and then run it. And this will tell you what services are open and running on your computer. This is very useful to find out if your computer has malware on it. I've run this on people's local networks, both at homes and businesses, and we've discovered, hey, you got a computer here. What computer is this? Oh, that's my son's or my daughter's computer upstairs. I said, what, do you know that it's running a web server on it? Well, no, why is it running a web server? They ended up getting a virus or malware, and hackers and pirates, which is an older term for people that steal software, were using that PC as a server to store illegal software and illegal documents or copyrighted software, copyrighted documents. So advanced port scanner, neat stuff. Now hackers use these tools also, so I'm asking you guys to be responsible and don't use these devices to hack each other, or go to your friends' houses, or go to Smoothie King and use their Wi-Fi and try to hack into their cash registers or whatever. But it's very eye-opening stuff. So really cool tools. Yeah, how do you hack? We could call this class Hacking 101 if you wanted to, but I don't really teach you guys how to hack. But I introduce you to tools which, unfortunately, hackers use. Just like these are very powerful tools. A chainsaw, for example, very powerful tool. But of course, somebody who wanted to kill people and be a murderer could also use that same chainsaw and kill people. It just depends on how you use these tools. So you don't have to submit that as a homework assignment, but you can add to it. If you do that, that's going to look better for you when I go to grade you again. This is kind of some of that unwritten extra credit. So check that out. Check Advanced IP Scanner, Advanced Port Scanner out. If you can't figure out how to use them, there's pretty good help online here on how to use it. And of course, as you guys probably know, you can go onto YouTube and search for anything, how to use Advanced IP Scanner to become an elite hacker. If you want to do that, lots of step-by-step videos. Okay, so now back to the beginning of this chapter 1 PowerPoint of Business Data Communications and Networking. Yes, I believe they have a Mac version. That's a good question, Stacy. And I'm pretty sure if you go Google for or Safari for. By the way, are any Mac people still using Safari? Or did you guys all pretty much give up and you use Google Chrome? So why don't you guys use Safari, you Mac people? Why didn't you use it? Is Safari not as good as Chrome? Not as good? Here's why I find most people use Chrome is because, it's about standardization and ubiquity. Chrome more or less looks like Chrome, whether you're running it on an Apple or a PC or a cell phone or a kiosk or a lot of other things. Whereas if you're going back and forth between Internet Explorer or Firefox or Opera or Edge, has anybody tried using Edge, by the way? Microsoft Edge.
Yes, it's not great.
It's kind of a replacement. It's a stripped down version of Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer used to be pretty much the only browser for a while. But then Internet Explorer got really bloated. It got like a school bus that overloaded with 100 people on it. And so they, rather than try to continue to reinvent Explorer because it got such a bad name, they said, okay, we'll get rid of it. And they came up with this awesome name called Edge. I guess they're taking it. I wonder if they have to pay that guy in the YouTube band any money for using that name, the Edge. But I've used it. It's just a stripped down browser. Does anybody else use anything else, by the way? Like Firefox or Opera? Or even Avast has some of the virus protection software have their own little browsers. Anyway, so business data communications is a networking chapter 1. I'm going to talk about first why networks are important, the basics of network components. So this is possibly a very simplified intro. We got a quick question here from Mohammed. So our homework assignment is to just send you our local. Yeah, if you go on to the Blackboard and you look at the assignment now, I'm pretty sure it's visible. It's just it says it's due back in February because I haven't changed it to this semester. Again, after class, I'll fix that. It describes what I want and how to submit it. Okay. And so, but you pretty much got it there. For bonus, you can screenshot the Advanced IP Scanner, Port Scanner, show me that you're using it, write a little bit about it, tell me your findings. This class, the way that we work this class this is more like a research class. You're conducting some experiments. It's kind of like biology class. And you're writing down your experimental notes and you're submitting them to me so that I can read through them and see what you discovered. It's a little harder to grade that way, but I find that the best way to learn this kind of stuff is through experimentation, just like with biology. Anyway, we're going to learn about the different network types that there are, network layers. And I've mentioned that 5-layer model already, very important model. The importance of standards, network standards, trends currently in networking, and the implications for us as managers or management focus. So why are networks important? Because of data. Data. Just in the last 4 years, that's where 90%, and I think I mentioned this in the last class, that's where 90% of the internet has come from because of the growth of data. Now, I started to mention this before, this term. There's the term data, then there's the term information. What is the difference, in your opinion, anybody's opinion, between data and information? They almost mean the same thing, but not quite.
Data is basically what eventually becomes information. Data is just a bunch of either numbers or just collection of data, and then once it gets processed, then it'll become information.
Sort of, yeah, that might be one way to think about it. I like Nicole's answer better. Data is unorganized and raw. So network managers and people that deal at the IT level, they're concerned primarily with data and not the content, and not what's in the data, just the amount of the data. Information is a higher level. It's data that's been put into context. For example, if I just gave you a number, 713-426-5656, what is that? Could be anything. Could be a password, could be a phone number, could be a social security number, could be anything. Excuse me, my eyes are killing me. Could be anything. When we put it into context, and I say this data is a phone number, or this data is my password, or my combination to a safe or something, then that becomes information. So I want you guys to understand from the beginning here, and the book doesn't make a good point of this, but this is important. You hear those terms interchangeably a lot, but they are very different things. Information is data that's been put into context, and it means different things to different people. But usually information is used by end users, used by application at layer 5, what we call layer 5, and we'll talk about layer 5 in a couple of minutes here. The application layer, whereas data is talking about bits and bytes, the throughput, the data rates. It's more of a technical issue. Now, what is the value? Here's another thing, it's slightly related. The true value of information. What makes information valuable? Or what makes networking valuable with respect to information? The value of information is to how quick we can receive it. There are, in a network, there is a sender and a receiver. Somebody who has information, or something that has information, like a server with data on it, and somebody that wants information, or something that wants information. Like, let's say I need to look up who won the 1932 World Series. If there was a 32 World Series, I could go Google for that. I am the receiver, I'm the requester, and then ultimately the receiver of the information. And the sender of the information is a server that was queried, or it might be, if you take it back even further than that, it's the person that submitted that information originally into the database. But the value of information is putting the sender and receiver closer together in time, not in distance, but in time. Back in the old days, before we had the internet, before we had telephones, before we had television, before we had modern communication, if I wanted to send a message, and I'm going to just talk about the United States for a minute, if I wanted to send a letter with information in it from the East Coast to the West Coast, let's say it's 1850, or before that, let's say it's 1820. How long do you think it took to get a letter, a simple one-page letter from New York to San Francisco in 1820? Just take a wild guess. And how did it get there? Any ideas? Yeah, probably about a month. That's a good guess, George, or Hans. Hans is a little bit closer. About a month on horseback. We didn't have trains yet. But yeah, on horseback, or before that even, on foot. This is how the Roman Empire communicated with each other. They built roads. In fact, the Roman Empire, if you really want to go back to the original network was Rome. All roads lead to Rome, or all roads lead out of Rome. So Rome built the first network of roads, like the Appian Way. Those streets that they built, the roads that they built, were the network cabling, basically. In the late 1820s, early 1830s, with the invention of the railroad, and the railroad still plays a very, very important role today in communications. And you might think, well, what, trains? Who takes trains? Who carries mail on trains? There's a real good reason why railroad, or at least the railroad pathways, are still very important for networking. And we'll learn that maybe not today, but keep railroads in mind when we're talking about some other stuff later. So with the invention of railroad and rail, and this also brings in the concept of standards. Standards are very important in networking. We could get that letter across the country in a couple of weeks. And then trains started getting a little bit faster, and in 2 weeks. Then with the invention of something called the telegraph, and eventually the telephone, we could essentially send information nearly instantaneously from New York to San Francisco. So that made that information much more valuable. If I wanted to buy some stocks on the stock exchange, for example, I need to know what the price of it is right now, not what the price of it was 2 weeks ago, because that won't do me any good. The price may have changed too radically. So information is meaningless when it's not timely. If it's dynamic or new information or current information, I should say. If it's historical information, that's different. But if it's current information, I want to know what the temperature is in Saskatchewan. I can look that up. It might be important if I'm flying there. You know, what should I wear? That kind of thing. So if I ask that question on the test, the value of information, the true value of information, is based on time. And I know this is true for a lot of you. You guys, when you want information, you want it right now. You want to whip out your cell phone and be able to know anything that you want to know. And that's why these inventions like Google and Bing and all these different search engines, although kind of Google rules the earth at this point, that's why they're so popular. Google is such a big company. Alphabet is the parent company. They don't even really know how big they are. They're bigger than Amazon, but they're not quite sure how big they are because they're so conglomerated and they own a bunch of different things. Amazon is now bigger than Microsoft. Jeff Bezos surpassed Bill Gates as one of the richest people in the world. Anybody have any idea how much Jeff Bezos? You guys don't know who Jeff Bezos is, by the way? B-E-Z-O-S. The guy who started Amazon.com. Any idea what he's worth? What's he worth, Franklin? Or do you just know? Or you just know who he is? He's worth, according to the number I read. Oh, 150 billion? Is that what I read 75 billion, but my number might be a little bit old. Yeah, too much to count. What are you going to do with that much money in the world? Who is the youngest billionaire? Or who became the youngest billionaire, by the way? Just since we're talking about billionaires.
Was it Mark Zuckerberg?
Yep, Zuckerberg. He became a billionaire at age 23. Crazy. Billionaire at 23. No wonder he's screwed up. So modern organizations rely on the efficient transmission of data. That is, being able to get the data whenever they want it and nearly instantaneously. Passing data around enables distributed systems and real-time communications, electronic commerce, social media, and web services, web interaction. Again, this is a little bit of older information that I updated, but as of 2016, Cisco estimated that over 3,000 petabytes, and you can go Google that. I do want you to know, it may not necessarily be a question on the test, but you probably should know what the difference between a kilobyte, a megabyte, a terabyte. What's after terabyte? It's a petabyte. That's 1,000 terabytes. And then an exabyte. And it keeps on going from there all the way up to a Google byte. If you go to that nodegraph.se, by the way, that's in Sweden, the numbers are a little bit more than Netflix accounts for 1/3 of primetime downstream traffic. It's probably more like 40% now. Streaming information now accounts for 60% or more of internet traffic, they're estimating, mostly because of COVID-19. Because everybody's at home now. We don't go out to bars, we don't go out to different things, we're not doing face-to-face stuff anymore. We're at home watching The Mandalorian or Ozark or Mr. Robot or Westworld or whatever other series you're binge watching. Amazon sells about 1.3 million items daily. That's just on average. That's not during Amazon Day or Christmas time. Every day on Facebook, there's 4.5 billion likes, 350 million photos uploaded. Now this is new. This is not data transmitted in a day. This is 4 new petabytes of data are generated, new data per day. And that's just Facebook. Just Facebook. And now we've got, what else do we have? What replaced Vines? That new thing, TikTok. TikTok. Yeah, TikTok is, I call TikTok a time vampire. It's kind of like the young people's versions of television these days. My girlfriend's kids can sit there and watch stupid TikTok videos for hours. It's like crack. I don't understand why that is. IoT. Did I mention that term in the last class, IoT? I want you to be responsible for what that term means, the Internet of Things. Oops, that's not what I wanted to show you. You can go Google that, but IoT, usually the way you see it written is a big I, a little O, and a big T, the Internet of Things. 90% of the Internet has come about just in the last 4 years because of the Internet of Things. If you want to be the next Jeff Bezos or the next Mark Zuckerberg, here's how you do it. You figure out what thing is not yet internetified. In the case of Mark Zuckerberg, it was Facebook, although he didn't invent social media communication. What was before Facebook? It was MySpace. Did anybody have a MySpace page in here? Yeah, what happened to MySpace?
Still around.
Yeah, it's still around, but what happened? I mean, why did it fall by the wayside? Any thoughts on that? Probably for the same reason that Internet Explorer fell by the wayside. It started to become weird and not as social media-ish. Facebook was better, basically just a better version of a social media platform that people felt better about. Last time I heard, who's that kid from NSYNC that has a majority ownership of MySpace? He tried to turn it into a music site. Who am I talking about? I can't remember now.
Timberlake?
Yeah, Justin Timberlake is a majority or was a majority owner of MySpace because he tried to turn it into a music website. So make sure you keep that term in mind. It's mostly a marketing term, but we have to think about those kind of things in terms of marketing, because one of the major things that any company has to do to sell their products is market. But like I said, if you can figure out the thing that we do, a main thing that we do now that we have not internetified, and you can figure out how to internetify that, then you'll make $1 billion. I can't think of anything right now, otherwise I guess I'd be a billionaire, but I don't know. Can anybody think of anything right off the top of their head? I'll write it down. We'll all go make $1 billion. Anyway, here's a couple of other terms, data and information I've already mentioned. These two terms a lot of times are used interchangeably, data communications and telecommunications. So the term data communications is the movement of computer information, that's bits, ones and zeros, from one point to another by means of electrical or optical transmission of systems. Most of us get our bits and bytes out of our computers with electricity. Some of us get it with light. Some of us get it with radio waves. Telecommunications is not using telephones to communicate. It used to be, but that's not what we use that term for anymore. Telecommunications is a broader term than data communications. It simply means communicating over distance. Tele is distance and communicado is the Latin version for communication. It involves voice, video, graphics. In other words, it puts the data in more context, but it's a broader term. Here are the basic network components. Networking is really not that complicated when you boil it down to little pieces like this. A client. The client is not you. You are not the client. You are the end user or the supplier of information. When we're talking about a network, a client is a device, usually that a user uses to access a network to request and receive data. Your laptop, your cell phone. Usually it's, like I said, being operated by a user. So it's going to have a keyboard, a mouse, and a keypad, or some sort of input-output peripherals on it. A server is a device or a service. It doesn't have to be a device. It can be a program that stores information or connects the client to a database of information and reacts to requests. There are many, many servers out there. They're sitting on the internet just waiting for requests. They don't do anything else. Web servers, for example, they just sit there waiting for somebody to call them, waiting around. Oh, you want me to give you a web page? Here you go. Here's some data. Okay, wake me up when you want to go to the next page. The circuit is simply the pathway or the connection between the client and the server, or it can be between a client and another client, or a server and another server. The circuit is not always a physical circuit. It could be wiring, it could be fiber optic, it could be wireless, or it could actually be a logical circuit. For example, right now we are communicating, everybody's communicating on a physical circuit. There is something that's attaching your laptop or your desktop or your cell phone to the physical device in your home. So you're probably talking on a radio circuit, using radio waves. I'd guess that probably everybody's using Wi-Fi these days. But there is a logical circuit going on between you and me. There's a logical network going on. And in this case, we are both clients. Or you could probably consider me the server and you're the client. You're requesting data from me, and I'm giving it to you. So you can have logical and physical circuits. We'll talk mostly about physical circuits in the beginning here. Here is a basic LAN layout. LAN stands for Local Area Network. Here are some generic icons that we use. Usually we draw a server device with an icon that looks something like this, a desktop style computer and a screen and a keyboard, although this is kind of going away. Most servers that sit out on the internet, one, they don't have people sitting at them, they're running autonomously. They're running code that is doing nothing but responding to requests, and they don't have screens and keyboards connected to them. No reason to. So this is old. This probably needs to be redone. Most servers, when I draw a server, I draw a skinny, narrow box. It's a one-use server that is in a data center in a rack. It doesn't look like this at all. Client computers or clients, we draw either a laptop or maybe one of these like a desktop computer, or other things that are clients could be considered printers, cameras, other peripheral devices are considered a client, or sometimes a server. Printers, for example, there's kind of a gray area there because a printer can be both a client and a server. Then you have the interconnecting devices, and there are more specific icons. What is that? Is that you, Tina? Okay. So a switch. A switch is a device that connects either physically or logically, typically physically, people to a local area network. It might have wires or it might have radio waves. A router, it's drawn like this. It's round with arrows going to the center of it. That is the device that typically connects a LAN to the outside world. Many times these two devices are combined in most of your home networks. Most of you have a multi-purpose device, and there's also something missing from here called an AP, or an access point. An access point is a wireless device. Now I'm going to guess most of you, are most of you at home? I'm going to guess most of you are at home or in your dorm room. If you're at home and you have a local area network in your home, you probably have a multi-purpose device that is operating as a switch. There's 4 physical ports on the back of it, and it's got some antennas sticking out of it, so it's acting like an access point for Wi-Fi communications. And it's also got a WAN port, or a wide area network port, on it, which connects to probably a cable modem, or maybe a DSL modem, or a fiber modem, depending on who you're paying for your internet service. And those devices are combined into one, and we call that a gateway. A gateway is a multi-function, multi-purpose device. It's still an interconnecting device, but it's called a gateway. You'll hear these terms used interchangeably: gateway, modem, router, switch, but they all mean different things. Oops. Okay, so if we break down networks into scope, that is generally how big they are, or how they're viewed. Let's talk about how they're viewed. So a LAN, or local area network, this is usually a small, clearly defined area. It may be covering all the computers in your home, or all the computers in a particular department, or all the computers at a company, although usually companies, organizations in a building have multiple LANs that are connected together in a backbone network. So the LAN is the thing that's physically closest to you, the end user, that your device, aka a client, is using to communicate on a network. You're all on a LAN right now. Most of you are probably on a WLAN. Add a W to the beginning of the word LAN, and WLAN stands for wireless LAN, WLAN. The backbone network, most of you probably don't have a backbone network in your homes, but when you go to work for a company, or you're here at U of H, that LAN connects to a larger network called a backbone network, and we have a big backbone here at U of H that carries all of the LANs from the different buildings over to a centralized location here at U of H, and then from there, that centralized location sends and receives data in and out of a wide area network connection called a WAN. So LAN, BN, and WAN. These are the 3 general scope of networking that we're going to study. Most organizations own their own LANs and their own backbone networks. Most of them do not own their own WAN networks. That WANs connect cities together, connect states together, connect you to the internet. When you guys usually see the term WAN, again, from a home standpoint or a small office standpoint, that's your internet connection. But for a multi-location organization, that WAN may not be an internet connection. It may be a WAN connection. If, for example, I have a location in Houston and a location in Dallas, and I want to connect them together in a close relationship, I may lease lines or lease a circuit from AT&T or Xfinity or Comcast to connect my 2 offices together. And then maybe from the Dallas office, I then have a separate internet connection that both Houston and Dallas share. most companies don't own the WANs because it would be very expensive and impossible. If you're not a communications company, you can't just lay down your own cable on the ground. You can use radio waves to some degree, and some companies do own their own WANs. Communication companies, oil companies, aerospace companies, they put up their own satellite. Elon Musk has his own WANs because he launches satellites. But they're usually also loaning a lot of that information to other companies, loaning that freeway basically. You can think of a network as roads on a freeway. So your local area network would be equivalent to the streets in your neighborhood. Everybody's closely associated within a neighborhood, or maybe the hallways in your dorm. You can consider that a local area network, or the hallways in your apartment complex. A backbone network is something that's a little bit bigger. And then a wide area network is like the interstates, which connect the different cities together. Interstate 10, for example, connecting LA to Houston to, if we had to, let's see, Interstate 10 I think ends in Jacksonville, if I'm not mistaken. So LAN, BN, WAN. And then there's another thing called GN, or global network, which is basically the internet. Here are some different ways to, some other different ways to consider looking at networks, how we break networks down. And some of you have heard of these terms. Intranet. So you've all heard of the internet. Internet, like interstate, is connecting networks together through long distances, usually unrelated entities. An intranet is a network, a lot of times it's a LAN, but not always, that uses internet technology to share information. In other words, an intranet uses web servers and web browsers so that an organization can share information with its own employees or its own students. Like U of H, for example. I'm logged into U of H's intranet to access uh.edu. Yes, I'm accessing it over the internet, but we can also say that's an intranet. I'm accessing the local company intranet. Extranet is very similar to intranet, and that's probably a term you guys have not heard, but and it's generally the same thing as an intranet. The only difference between these two terms is that the users of the information are not as closely related. They are not employees of the same company. They're not, it's not a student-university relationship. It's using internet technologies, AKA web pages and email and FTP and all those different networking protocols that we can use. But it might be a doctor to a hospital, or an insurance company, or a doctor's office to a pharmacy, for example. We need to share information. Insurance companies need to share information with hospitals and vice versa so that we can get our insurance claims paid. And sometimes they need to be in a closed network. I used to do a lot of programming for the medical billing industry. And in order to transmit claims in medical insurance claims to Blue Shield of Texas, which handled Medicare and Medicaid and workers' comp also, we had to actually have a wide area network connection from here to Dallas, or actually Richardson, Texas, where Blue Shield of Texas was located at the time. We called that an extranet. Suppliers and customers communicate with each other in an extranet. Okay, so let's talk about network models. Network, and this is not, never mind, I was gonna make a joke, but I changed my mind. Network models divide the communication functions into layers. We use layers so that we can better understand the networking, so that we can break it down, and network managers and manufacturers can concentrate just on certain areas of networking. And it also helps us better understand and better learn how networking works. there is a model called the Open Systems Interconnect Reference Model, the OSI model. The government, for example, has a private WAN. Well, the government, Franklin, what are you referring to by the government? There's many different branches of the government, but to answer your question, yes, like the post office, for example. Every post office location is connected to a centralized network which does not go over the internet. They don't use the internet. They have wide area network, dedicated circuits that they use. Banking, the banking industry uses their own private WANs. That's a good discrimination between the internet and what a WAN is it's private. So the Open Systems Interconnection Reference Model, the OSI model, developed by the ISO, by the way, it's a little confusing. The OSI developed by the ISO. The ISO stands for International Organization of Standards. Why is it not called the iOS, you might ask? And that's because it's written in French. It's a Swiss organization. We actually are going to learn a simpler OSI model, 7 layers. It's a little more complicated. I'm going to do you guys a favor, and we're just going to learn the 5-layer model. We used to just learn a 4-layer model, but because of the advent of different kinds of services that we now use on the internet, the 5-layer model is more appropriate. This is the 2 different models. Here's the OSI model. I'm going to start from the bottom, physical layer, because it's the same on both of them. This is known as layer 1. So if I ask you on a test, hint, hint, layer 1, and I have students get this backwards or upside down every time. If I say, what is layer 1 of the networking model? It's the bottom layer or the physical layer, aka anything you can touch or see or physically interact with. I'm talking about the circuits, the servers, the clients, the hardware, the radio waves. Although you can't really see radio waves, you can certainly interact with radio waves, and they potentially do good or bad things to you depending on how you use them. Physical layer, electrical signals, light signals, radio waves. On top of the physical layer, something called the data link layer. Now, confusingly, Microsoft likes to call the physical address of a computer, which is actually the data link layer address, the physical address. And that's because these two layers in both of these models are very closely related to each other. The data link layer is the layer that your client computer and server computers use to communicate with the next physical device that is attached to it. In other words, most of you are communicating with a switch or a gateway device. Each one of these devices has unique numbers. That's that MAC address that I had you, that I was showing you earlier, that big long 12-digit number that has letters in it also. That is what Microsoft calls your physical address. That's called a data link layer address. Those are hard-coded. You can't typically change those. Those are assigned by standards organizations to manufacturers that apply for a range of addresses, and then they program them in their devices. And that's called layer 2. Okay, layer 3, the network layer. This is where IP addresses live. The network layer allows you to communicate beyond your local area network. Back in the old days, when we just had LANs, back in the early to mid 80s, with LANs, we did not have a network layer. We basically had a 3-layer model. We had the physical layer, the data link layer, and then the application layer. And applications spoke directly to the data link and physical layer. We invented this network layer so that we could differentiate between what devices and what computers are local to us. In other words, what are we physically connected to, and what is somewhere else in the world. Think about the data link layer as your local post office, or maybe not even your local post office. Think about it as the mailbox down at the end of the street. Most of you live in neighborhoods or apartment complexes where the mailbox is no longer on your door, in your yard, it's down at the end of the street. So that box thing down at the end of the street, the physical pathway between you and that box, the street that you walk down, that is your LAN. And that mailbox there is your data link layer. You can write letters, or if you want, let's say you want to give information to somebody in your neighborhood. You normally wouldn't write them a letter, I mean, unless you don't know them that well. But if they're physically close to you, you might just want to go over and knock on the door and say, hey, you guys are making too much noise, shut up, or whatever it is, or hey, I want to join the party. That's a LAN. If you want to communicate with somebody in the outside world, you can send them a letter. You can address that letter if you know their address. You don't have to know where that address is. You just have to know what the address is. That's equivalent, that's the network layer, that's equivalent to the post office. The post office has this great addressing scheme that we use. We put, the only thing that you need to deliver a letter pretty much anywhere to any address is the street number, the name of the street, and the zip code. You don't even need the city and state. Just those three items. Number on the street, the name of the street, and the zip code. So the number on the street is like your MAC address, your data link layer address, along with the name of the street. And then the zip code is a further representation of your address, but that's kind of like equivalent to your IP address. Many people in one neighborhood share a zip code. Many of you are sharing an IP address in a home. So zip code is like the network address. So we need that network layer specifically because we communicate with entities somewhere in the world that we don't know where they are, but we need to communicate with them. And then we have this other layer called the transport layer. And the reason we have this is because we run multiple programs on our computers. Back in the old days, our computer would run one program at a time. It was either running a word processor or a game or a spreadsheet program, but that was it. With the advent of a GUI and a multi-operating system, our computers can run lots of things at one time. So in order for your computer to define which application this data was generated from, or which application this data needs to go into on the server side, we assign port numbers. Every well-known application is assigned to a specific port number. A web service, for example, most web requests and web responses come on port. Take a guess. Anybody know what the web port is? It's a number between 1 and 65535, or 0 and 65535, which is 2 to the 16th power, minus 1. Port 80. Port 80 is the web port. You guys ever heard that before? Port 80 is your web port. If you were to go surf, and this is what we used to have to do. Luckily, we have really cool things like DHCP and DNS, but back in the old days, if I wanted to go to a web page, I could not go to uh.edu, for example. These days, I can just type in uh.edu, and I'll end up going to U of H's main website. Before 1990, and yes, the internet's been around a lot longer than 1990. In fact, we had GUIs before then, and we had browsers before then. If I wanted somebody to go to my web page, I had to say, hey, go check out my web page at 129.7.1.16:80 and use the HTTP protocol, by the way. So let me look up the IP address of uh.edu real quick. I'm going to cheat, do it this little cheaty way. Hang on one second. I gotta minimize that. I just opened a command prompt here. I'm on a ping. By the way, if you don't know what the ping command is, it's a ubiquitous little program that's installed with everybody's operating system, which allows us to check to see if a particular IP address is alive in the world. I type in ping uh.edu. It tells me two things. It tells me, first of all, what the IP address is of uh.edu. It's not always the same every time, but let's pretend that it is. So 129.7.97.54. So this is what we used to have to do. We had to say, go to my website. It's at http://129.7. What was that number? 97.54. 97.54:80. If I do that, it brings me to the very same thing. We don't have to put in the port 80 because our web browser does it for us. It's implied. Now, what a lot of companies do is they run special web servers like intranet web servers on alternate ports. Maybe port 80123. Oh no, that's too high of a number. Port 8085, for example, or 4444, or some other port number, but 80 is the standard port number. And there are also other protocols you can type in, like FTP and Gopher and SMTP. There's a few other protocols, but HTTP and HTTPS, by the way, overwhelmingly is the, I go to chase.com, for example. Overwhelmingly, that is the, I'm not going to let you see what my username is, so I closed that before it displayed that. Hang on one second. So port number is in layer 4. So transport layer, that's layer 4. And then in the internet model, these top 3 layers are within the application layer. The session layer refers to setting up a communication. The presentation layer is the layer that describes how it's displayed to the user, like using HTML, for example. And then the application layer is, of course, very specific to what the application does. Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a game? Is it a word processor? Is it a form that you fill out for information? What is it? We learned this model. So from layer 1, remember this now, layer 1 all the way up to layer 5. And many times you will hear me refer to layers not by their names, but by their numbers, by their levels. So you need to memorize as soon as possible. Get this in your head, make it just, you know, it shouldn't be too difficult to memorize, but I tell you, on exam 1, I always have somebody, and I'll say one of my questions is draw the internet model, number the layers, and invariably somebody draws it upside down. Physical layer is layer 5 and transport layer is layer 4. No, I'm sorry, data link layer is layer 4. That's wrong. Bottom to top. Physical, data link, network layer, transport layer, application layer, okay? Now we can actually consider it even simpler. This is how Microsoft looks at it from an end user standpoint. They call those first 2 layers the hardware layer. And that's because the data link layer is very closely associated with the physical layer. That's why we call it the MAC address, the hardware address, or that's why they call it that. And that's because that MAC address, although it is changeable, normally you don't change it. It's hard-coded into a chip that exists on your network card inside your computer. Then this next layer is called the next layer is called the internetworking layer, which is a combination of the IP address and the port number. Some other popular port numbers, by the way, are port 25 that we use for web traffic. Port 53 is what we use for DNS. I'm sorry, port 25 is for email. Did I say web? I meant email traffic. 25 and 57 are for email. 52 is for DNS. And then application layer is where all our games run. Now, end users, we only communicate, we only are really familiar with and understand. Let's pretend you know nothing about networking. The only thing that you're probably familiar with right now is the hardware layer, because you've had to plug in network cables or adjust an antenna or connect a laptop to a wireless network, and the application layer. You know very little about the internetworking layers. In the middle, this is what we're going to learn. It's important to manage this. A protocol. What is a protocol? How is that different from a language? In society, how is a protocol different from a language? Let's take a culture like the Japanese culture. Japanese is certainly a different language than English, Oh no, let's take a different example. Let's take United States versus the UK. England and the United States speak the same language. We both speak English, but our protocols are different. What am I talking about when I say protocol? Well, what side of the road do we drive on here in the United States? We drive on the correct side of the road, the right side of the road. And in the UK and several other countries, they drive on the wrong side or the left side of the road. We say it's the wrong side. It's not really the wrong side. It's just a protocol difference. They decided a long time ago when they invented cars, or actually goes much further back than cars, and it goes back to carriages. Excuse me. In their society, they arbitrarily decided that the left side of the road was the appropriate side to drive on. Whereas in the United States, we decided the right side of the road was appropriate to drive on. That's a protocol difference. The data and the language is the same, but how we choose to organize that data is different. When I say protocol, I'm talking about a communication method like HTTP, Hypertext Transport Protocol. That's used specifically for web traffic. SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, that's used for email traffic. FTP, File Transfer Protocol, that's so that programs can transmit files from sender to receiver, or client to client, or server to server. The data might look the same. You might want to download a photo. You can download a photo from a website using HTTP or SMTP or FTP or FTPS, or several different ways. The important thing is that your protocols have to agree with each other so that that data is received properly. Although both of us speak English, America and the UK, if I don't follow their protocol when I'm there, I will run into people driving the car. Has anybody rented a car in another country that drove on the different side of the road? Or has anybody come here and had to learn how to drive all over again because you're now driving on a different side of the road than you were in Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever you happen to be from? Or Australia. Yeah, Australia, large country. They all drive on the wrong side of the road. Are you from Australia, Franklin?
No, I visited there a few years back and rented a car.
So not only do they drive on the different side of the road, but the steering wheel is on the opposite side of the car. Has anybody ever been to the Bahamas, by the way? The Bahamas is real scary because they drive on the left side of the road, but they use American cars or American designed cars. And so their steering wheel is still on the left, which means the drivers, when they're passing each other, and this is why there's so many car accidents in the Bahamas, because the drivers are literally 12 feet apart, and a lot of times it's hard to judge lane distances. And in a lot of places in the Bahamas, the roads are literally dirt roads that are like 1.5 lanes wide, so they have a lot of collisions. Crazy. My dad lived in the Bahamas for a little while. He said, yeah, that was a little difficult to get used to, driving a left-hand drive car on the left side of the road. Okay, so protocol defines a specific language of transmission. The data could be the same, but it's how I send and receive it. Downloading photos, and some protocols are better than others. For example, if you wanted to download a lot of photos or download information the fastest possible way, you might not want to use a web page to transmit your information. The HTTP protocol has a lot of overhead and it's slow. You might want to use FTP instead. Use an FTP program like WinSCP. A protocol data unit, or PDU, contains the layer-specific information necessary for a message to be transmitted through a network. Each layer adds what's called a PDU. I'll show you a graphic in a minute. At each layer, all information begins at the application layer, whether it's a request from you, a web request. I want to go to www.uh.edu, starts up here at layer 5. That request gets filtered all the way down to layer 1, where it gets turned into bits, ones and zeros and transmitted over the internet or through space, like you see my space back here, over a satellite transmission, and then received by the physical layer of another device, and it percolates back up through the physical layer, back to the application layer of that server. Each time the data goes through one of these layers, it is either encapsulated or decapsulated. So let's look at how that works. Up here, layer 5, the application layer. The reason why we have the application layer is this is your user access to the network. And this is also where software that performs the work lives. Again, there are client programs and server programs. Most of you are using the Chrome web browser or the Chrome web client. Most websites that you are surfing to are using something called Apache, A-P-A-C-H-E, like the Native American tribe, the Apache web server software. They're not using Chrome because Chrome is not a server program, it's a client program. Example protocols at the application layer, and there are many. There's HTTP,
I
SMTP.
was just on YouTube so I could use the speed thing.
What's that? Hello? Remember that you
I
got
wish
your
the Zoom
some of
meeting
you
had a
microphones on.
×2.
You had to mute Muhammad. HTTP, SMTP, DNS, FTP, DHCP. You'll notice something similar with all these protocols, or most of them. They all end in the letter P. You need to know, these are like the 8 most popular ones. You need to know what these are. You can go Google for these, and they're in my notes, and I'm going to talk about them a lot. The protocol data unit, what do we call the data, the chunk of bits at this point? We call that, the notes say packet. I call it data or message. The appropriate thing to call it is a message. So this is where I disagree with the book. As a matter of fact, there is no official PDU name at layer 5, but typically we call it the message. What do you want to send to the outside world? If I ask a question on a test, like what's the PDU at a particular layer, I typically leave layer 5 off, just to avoid. I either leave it off or I accept multiple answers there. You can say packet, but nobody refers to it as a packet. In the real world, if we were looking for a real world example, this would be a letter that you, let's say you want to write a letter to your grandma. So you get out a piece of paper and you write a letter. That's your message, okay? Then what do you do with that letter? You take that letter and you fold it up and you put it in an envelope. That's the transport layer. The transport layer is there to deal with the end-to-end management of a message. Transport layer helps you find where that message needs to go, sort of. That's mostly the network layer, but it helps you identify what protocol to use. Links the application layer to the network layer. Transport layer also segments and tracks your messages, and it also is responsible for something called flow control. Now, most of you, if you're going to write a letter to grandma, you write a big, long, multi-page letter. I'm sorry, I haven't written you in a long time, grandma. This COVID-19 sucks thing, you know, whatever. You put that in an envelope and mail it. In the networking world, our segments or our messages have to get broken up into little pieces because usually there's a maximum number of bytes we can put in a message. In most networks, that number of bytes is 1,500. So if you wrote a letter of more than 1,500 characters, you're going to have to rip that letter into smaller pieces and put it into multiple envelopes. And that, in part, is what the transport layer does. It segments your messages into smaller pieces if necessary. Example protocols, there's not very many at this layer. TCP and UDP. Transport Control Protocol and User Datagram Protocol. And I'll talk about the difference between those later on, possibly not today, maybe in a later class. The PDU at this level is called a segment. And by the way, this chart that I'm showing you, that's, if you can memorize this chart or have this chart handy when you take exam 1, This is 10% of exam 1 right here. I ask you in one of the questions, label all the layers of the network model, give me some examples, example addresses. What you don't see up here is example addresses. There's actually another column we can put on here. Like what's an example of address, what's an example address at the application layer? uh.edu, that's an address. Jake at uh.edu, that's an application layer address. My Zoom meeting number, the 409-331-5253, that is an application layer address. It only makes sense to the application. Transport layer address, what's an example of transport layer address? Those are the port numbers. Port 80, port 25, port 53, port 139, pretty much any number between 0 and 65535. Network layer. This is layer 3. The purpose of the network layer is for routing and addressing, deciding where your message needs to go. Example protocols, there's really only one protocol that we ever use as an end user or as a client, and that's the IP protocol. Now there are two popular versions of IP. There's IP version 4, and there's the newer IP version 6. There was no IP version 5. You'll find, it actually was, but it was a prototype version. You'll find a lot of times standards making bodies skip numbers where the even numbers, and this is depending, of course, on the application, but even numbers are the official standards and the odd numbers are the unofficial or non-ratified standards. So there was no IP version 5, just like there was no Windows 9. It was, maybe it was something they developed in-house and they said, oh, this sucks, let's start over. It's so significantly different, we'll call it Windows 10. You'll find that in the application industry. So IP stands for Internet Protocol. Very simple stuff. There used to be other network protocols. IBM had a networking protocol called SNA, but nobody uses that anymore. PDU at the network layer is called a packet. Remember that, packet, IP packet. Data link layer, this is the layer that connects you to the next device, another laptop in your house, for example. Its purpose is to control the hardware, format a message, and do what's called error checking. And we'll talk about the data link layer more specifically, what those 3 items are in the next chapter. Example, the most common example of that is Ethernet. Oh, excuse me, so sorry, I need to go get some coffee. Ethernet. You're all communicating most likely on an Ethernet network. It may be a wireless Ethernet network, so it's probably an 802.11 Ethernet network, but it's still Ethernet. There were some other protocols, and there are other protocols like PPP, but usually on a LAN you're using Ethernet. What we call the PDU, or the chunk of data at that point, is a frame. And then finally down at layer 1, the physical layer, the purpose of the physical layer is to physically connect your data to some other location. The physical layer is the only layer where the data leaves your computer and goes into your computer. That's the network port on the back of your computer or the antenna inside your computer. Everybody has an antenna in their computer, whether they know it or not, inside the laptop screen. There's a piece of, if you were to open your laptop screen, go ahead, I'll wait, go ahead and crack it open. No, I'm kidding, don't open your laptop. You have an old one, be my guest, but you'll see a little piece of cellophane metal taped to the inside of the screen. That's an antenna in there. That layer is different from all the other layers because it's hardware. It's not code. Everything else is code. Everything else is programming. This is the radio waves, the electrical impulses that are leaving and coming into your computer. Examples of that are 10 base T, 100 base T, 802.11n. And this is actually, again, the book's not always correct. 802.11n is actually a protocol suite, which is a combination of a specific physical layer using 2 very common radio frequencies, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. That's where that 2.4 and 5.0 comes in. But then also using a particular framing type that looks like Ethernet. So 802.11n, I would say, is not a good example of a physical layer protocol. RJ45 or Cat5e or Twisted Pair or coax. That's an example of a physical layer protocol. There is no PDU at the physical layer. Or if I asked you to come up with something that we could call the PDU, I would just say that's bits. Ones and zeros. The data when it comes out of your computer, regardless of whatever it was, if it's, you know, the data that I'm generating right now and the data that's going into my application layer is sound and video. Ultimately, that information gets turned into ones and zeros. That's all that's leaving your computer and that's all that's coming into your computer. Ones and zeros, or zeros and ones, binary. Why is that the only thing coming into and going out of your computer? Because that's how we represent the data, because everything is waves. Everything is a wave, whether it's a light wave or a radio wave or an audio wave. I'm speaking to you in audio. Everything is coming in a wave. At the top of the wave, that might represent a 1, and the bottom of the wave might represent a 0. This is positive 5 volts, this is 0 or negative 5 volts. Binary, ones and zeros. We can convert anything we want to into a series of ones and zeros. Computers prefer to speak binary. It's very easy. It's a very simple encoding scheme. Here's what happens to data, or information, I should say. So you go type in uh.edu. That's your message. That's your information. You've put it into context, or your application puts it into context, creates information by sticking this protocol header on it, HTTP. That's an application layer protocol that identifies this data as a web request. So the request itself is data, uh.edu. That's just data. It doesn't tell you what that is. When I stick HTTP in front of it, that's information now. And the way that HTTP got there is your web browser stuck it in there for you. You didn't have to type that in. You could have, but you didn't need to. Transport layer takes that information, encapsulates it, that was that term, encapsulation, into a segment, adds a little bit of information in the front. In this case, it adds a port 80. It identifies HTTP, and there's a table in your computer called the MIME type table. It looks it up, says, okay, well, my web browser is running at a certain port number, port 80. Let me stick an 80 in there. The transport layer, depending on how big that request is, might need to break it up into 2 or more pieces, but let's pretend it's not doing that right now. The network layer, once your information is encapsulated in the transport layer then hands that segment down to the next layer down, the network layer, further encapsulates it. You can consider it like this. So you took that letter, you addressed it, you put it in an envelope. That's like the transport layer. Then that envelope went into the box down at the end of the street, and the postal carrier picked it up, and he took it to the post office, and then it gets put into a truck or a boat or a plane. That's like the network layer. Eventually that boat or plane goes somewhere else in a bigger boat or a bigger plane. That's the data link layer. So IP addresses, your IP and the destination IP address is added at the network layer. So that's a packet at this point. The data link layer creates a frame, and all that we're inside the computer at this point. Our data has not left your computer. All 5 of these layers live in your computer. The data is inside the computer. Data link layer adds Ethernet data to it, your MAC address and the MAC address of the next physical device you're connected to. Finally, all that information is given to the physical layer, and the physical layer turns it into electrical signals, ones and zeros. Waves. We usually write digital data like this. Those are waves. They just look like, Aztec waves. Funny looking waves. That Data is transmitted over the Ethernet or over the radio to the receiving computer. It takes those ones and zeros, converts them back into letters and numbers. And again, that's what the data link protocol does. Converts it back into a readable protocol. By the way, the sender and the receiver have to agree on the same data link protocol here. Then the data link layer of the receiving computer or the receiving device then takes that frame and strips off the Ethernet information and creates a packet. The packet destination IP address is examined. If it's for this computer, strips the packet information off, creates a segment. Eventually, layer 4 will give that information to the appropriate application on the server. Servers are many times running multiple applications. The only way to know which application I should feed this data into is with that segment information, that transport packet, excuse me, I went all the way to the beginning. That transport packet segment, by the way, has to have an appropriate port number in it, port 80, for example, for web traffic. So ultimately, a web server gets your request, HTTP. Oh, what do you want me to do with this? UH.edu. Let me go look up the appropriate web page for that. And then it starts all over again. The receiving computer creates a response. And the data is sent back down through its physical layer, transmits over to the physical layer of the sender, and sends a reciprocal message back. Now, sender and receiver are never physically right next to each other. This is just done for modeling purposes here. So that is the entire graphical model there of what's going on inside your computer and inside a server or a recipient computer receiving your message. Seems like a lot, doesn't it? But it's not. We're going to take each one of these layers one layer at a time and learn specifically what each layer does and how it does it and how they work. Why do we use layers? Advantages of layers. Networking functionality is modular. Software and hardware at any layer can be more easily substituted or used. Back in the old days, we didn't use layers like this. In other words, when we wrote applications as programmers, we literally had to build in what kind of physical network card we were using. We had to know when you installed software, you had to tell the software, I'm using a Thomas Conrad ArcNet card, I'm using an Intel Ethernet card. It was one of the questions you had to answer when you installed programs. That's crazy. It got to the point because there were so many different network cards you could buy. I remember installing software and the list of possible network cards was hundreds of lines long. And every network manufacturer, like Thomas Conrad, for example, they were a very popular network manufacturer. Nowadays, there's only a few. There's Realtek chipset and Intel chipset, or the DEC and chipset. So there's really only 3 chipsets. Thomas Conrad had 20 different network cards. And then there was another manufacturer that had 20 different types of network cards. It got crazy. So the OSI people and the standards making people said, hey, let's modularize this thing. Let's break it down to make it easier to understand, easier to interoperate, easier to troubleshoot and make changes. Now, layers do slow things down. Think about the layers of management at your company if you work for a large company, or think about the layers here at U of H. Let's say you want to get a message to Renu Khator, the chancellor of the university. Can you just go knock on her door and say, or maybe you can, but normally you have to follow channels. Like I can't just go call Renu and say, hey, I think you should send the Bauer College of Business a lot more money. I have to go through proper channels. I have to submit my request to my department chair. And then my request goes to the dean of the College of Business. And then that request goes to somebody in the chancellor's office. And ultimately that request goes up to Renu or the Board of Regents or whoever that information is supposed to go to then be acted upon. That's an okay thing. That's a good thing. You do not want a situation where every faculty member can just simply call Renu Couture on the phone and say, hey, I think you should do this. There'd be no way she could communicate efficiently with 10,000 faculty members or 40,000 students. So we have a hierarchy. So that's in part what the layering does. It creates a hierarchy so that your physical layer can handle multiple applications running on a computer, and it doesn't have to worry about, is this web traffic, is this FTP traffic, is this email, what the heck is it? It doesn't matter. As long as it's data that needs to go somewhere, all I need to know is the MAC address. Where do you want me to send this? The post office doesn't care what's in your letters. They don't care. Amazon.com doesn't care what's in your boxes. Or I should say, the delivery drivers don't care what's in your boxes. That's not their job. They're just the delivery drivers. So that's why we break those down. If the postal carriers needed to know what was in your letters, in your mail, then it would take them a long time to open up the mail and read it. Nor is it appropriate. Application developer. So if I'm writing applications, if I'm writing code, if I'm trying to be the next Mark Zuckerberg and come up with the next social media thing, TikTok or whatever it is, I don't want to have to learn hardware. Gee, is my application going to run on an Apple or a PC or an Android, or is it wired networking? Is it wireless? I don't care. All I have to worry about is the application layer protocols. Am I trying to build a better web browser? Am I trying to build a better video teleconferencing program? I can just adhere to standards at that layer. And as long as I make my code HTTP compliant or SMTP email compliant, I don't have to care what the physical layer is that particular user is using. So that's the advantages of the layering. The disadvantages are it is more inefficient because information is added at every layer. If we look at our original request, we go back through this. If I was to type in a browser UH.edu, that's literally UH.edu. That's 6 bytes or 6 characters. The transport layer is going to add a few more bytes. The network layer is going to add 24 bytes. The data link layer is going to add another 28 bytes. By the time your 6 bytes, your 6 characters get down to the physical layer, your frame is actually about 100 bytes long. So your computer has to send 100 bytes, or the equivalent of that many bits, 100 bytes times 8, or 800 bits out the door, just to write or just to transmit UH.edu across the internet. Overhead. Every layer adds overhead. Again, it's just like taking your envelope, putting it in a little bit bigger box, putting that box onto a truck, putting that truck onto a boat. You're adding overhead there. So it is inefficient to do this, but it's required because the internet is shared. We have to have some sort of control. Why do we have, in large cities like this, why do we have street lights and stop signs? Because we have multiple people using our roads. If we were in a small town and there were roads in that small town, or roads in our neighborhoods, for example, we don't have street lights. And in some cases, we don't have stop signs. We have yield signs sometimes, or maybe no signs at all if it's a very small town, very small neighborhood. And that's because there's not that much traffic going on. If it's your own driveway, for example, you don't need traffic lights on your driveway because you're the only one using your network. So the reason that we have all these layers is because you are not the only person in the world. Your client machine is communicating in a network of 1 billion other client machines, and your data needs to nicely interleave with other data across the internet and other data coming into and going out of your computer. You've got lots of stuff coming into and going out of your computer whether you're doing anything or not. As a matter of fact, when you start experimenting with Wireshark, which is one of the programs that you need to install on either on your laptop computers or your virtual machine, with Wireshark, you fire that thing up, then you go into a web browser, and before you even type anything in a web browser, you'll see Wireshark scrolling up thousands of bytes of data going out of your computer and coming into your computer. What the hell is all of that? It's a bunch of background services and processes going on. It's other applications checking to see, are there new versions of the software? Do I need to download them? It's a bunch of background stuff going on in your computer that you as an end user don't see. We have to have layers in order to deal with all of that. Okay, we're almost there. I know it's 3:45. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here. So, standards, network standards are important. We use standards because we don't know most of the time who we're communicating with. We have to we develop standards so that we decide, okay, we're going to, in the United States, we've decided we're all going to drive on the right side of the road. We've decided that the steering wheel in the car is going to be on the left side. We've decided that the accelerator pedal is going to be on the right, the brake pedal is going to be on the left. Those are programmed that way to standards so that somebody can learn to drive a car and then get into pretty much any car, except for maybe a standard stick shift, ironically. Isn't it funny that they call a stick shift a standard car and an automatic is called an automatic? I'd say these days an automatic car is a standard, and what we call a standard car is really a stick shift, because many of us don't know how to drive a stick shift. Excuse me. So because we don't know we typically don't know the recipient that we're speaking with, it's important for us to adhere to standards. If I needed to get from point A to point B as fast as I possibly could, and I knew all the aspects of point A to point B, I could choose the fastest possible protocol or the fastest possible way. I could choose to run, throw a rock, drive a car, fly my own plane, whatever it is, and I wouldn't need to worry about what appropriate standard I should use is, especially if I owned that area, if I owned that land. But because I'm transmitting my data across a shared network called the internet, I have to adhere to standards so my plane doesn't fly into somebody else's plane, so that my car doesn't drive into somebody else's car. Standards are, internet traffic has to be polite. There's two kinds of standards. There's de jure standards, which are official, published on the internet. HTTP is one. IEEE, that's Ethernet. And then there's de facto standards. A de facto standard is something like, what do we use as a web browser? What do you all use as a web browser? Most everybody uses Chrome. Why do you use Chrome? Who told you you had to use Chrome? Maybe a teacher told you, maybe you just told yourself. Maybe you learned over usage, hey, Chrome is better, Chrome works right. So although Google Chrome is not an official standard, at least not in this country, it's a de facto standard. When I say go Google for something, what do I mean? I mean go search for something. How many of you in here use something other than Google to search for information? Do you Bing for information? Do you Yahoo for information? Does anybody remember Excite or Lycos or any of these other search engines? They're still there. Ask Jeeves, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, those are some older ones, but the de facto standard, of course, is Google. And that's because they generally have a better, maybe not better, but a simpler product. Products aren't better if they're too complex to use. The best products out there are the simple ones. The easier it is to learn how to use something, and the more effective and more usable it is, the faster that you can get in and out of it, the more likely it is you're going to like using it. Let's skip that. This kind of this further describes some of these common standards. I already looked at that. Here's a few trends that are going on these days. BYOD, the Internet of Things, we'll talk about in a minute, but BYOD, bring your own device. Kind of like BYOB, it's BYOD. Most organizations used to shun this. They used to hate it. Employees would come to work with their own laptops and their own cell phones and then say, hey, I want to connect my own laptop to this network. May I do that? Network managers used to not like that because we lose control. It's kind of going away from the standard. If I let you get on the internet with your device and then you have problems, I can't support your device because I know nothing about Apple, for example. Maybe I'm a PC guy. Or I know nothing about Androids, but I'm an iPhone guy. So, but BYOD these days is an official thing, and that's because companies realize, hey, our employees, to be more efficient, to be more effective, to be more comfortable, they want to use their own devices, especially with COVID-19. I don't want to sit down to a generic device. Is anybody considered, because I know some of you have gone to a library before, either you don't have your own computer or need to use another computer, sat down at a public library to use a public computer. Imagine doing that today with COVID-19 all over it, or whatever all over it. It's like using a public bathroom. You don't want to do that. For the same reason, network managers have to realize users need to use the device that they're comfortable with, that's been personalized for them, as long as that device adheres to certain standards. Like I might tell my employees, you can use your laptop or your Android or your iPhone or whatever the hell you want, as long as you use the Chrome browser or Edge or Safari or whatever it is, as long as the browser you're using is this, so that you have the same kind of experience, regardless of the hardware you're using. Some of the challenges that brings up is, of course, security, who's responsible for the support of that device. IoT, already talked about that, the web of things. Everything is connected to the internet. Cars, refrigerators, thermostats. Now let me just briefly point something out. Is connecting your car or connecting your refrigerator to the internet for you? What's the advantage? Why would your car need to be connected to the internet? Is it really there for you? Your refrigerator, why can you buy refrigerators? I don't know if anybody has one, but why would you buy a refrigerator that's internet capable? Is it so you could surf the web while you're sitting in front of your fridge because you just can't get that much internet? Is it so you can watch TV on your fridge? That's not what it's for. The manufacturers do it. Manufacturers of appliances and devices and hardware, they want to generate a consumable stream of income. Refrigerators have filters in them. Refrigerators have maintenance schedules associated with them. So if I want to generate extra income, an income stream, an ongoing income stream, I'll build a device and maybe I'll charge a little extra for the internet service, but that gives me a window into your device so that I can send you periodic emails. Hey, your filter needs to be changed. Here's a coupon for 3 filters for the price of 2 if you order it from whirlpool.com or maytag.com. Your manufacturers of your cars can send you emails and send you text messages to say, hey, it's time for an oil change. Don't go to Jiffy Lube down the street because they'll fuck it up. Come to Ford or Chrysler or Mercedes-Benz or whatever it is, because we built the car. We know everything there is to know about that car. Let us do it. That gives them the income stream. That's why they're doing it. They're not doing it so that you can log into your refrigerator to see what is in it. That's not what that's all about. It's about generating additional income streams for the manufacturers. Also, and I know I'm running almost to the 2 hours. I'm sorry for that. What's another reason why manufacturers and why developers make things internet capable? What's really the most important and most insidious reason for manufacturers? So they can spy on you. Not that they're really spying on you. They're looking for survey data. They're looking for behavioral data so that they can hopefully make their product better and figure out how can we sell more of this product. The car companies don't really give a crap where you're driving, but they do want to know how often you're driving, how many times you start and stop, what your average speed is, how often that you do actually go get your oil change. They want to capture that data, because that's one thing that companies have the hardest thing doing, is getting feedback from their customers. Everybody gets surveys in their mail and their email, right? Gets surveys all the time. You called Comcast because you had some issue with your internet connectivity. They solve your issue maybe, and then 10 minutes later you get a Comcast or an Xfinity customer satisfaction survey. How many people actually fill out those surveys? You guys waste your time and fill out those surveys? Hell no, you got more important crap to do. I don't fill out surveys ever. I don't have time for that crap. You're not doing yourself any favors. Some companies try to entice you to fill out surveys by offering $5 off your next visit for an oil change or whatever. And that's because survey data is so important to companies to try to keep customers. They do it because they're trying to figure out, how do we keep this customer? That's why we connect everything to the internet. That's why manufacturers, developers want to connect everybody together. They're not trying to actually spy on you, at least not in this country. Maybe in China and Korea they are, but I'm not picking on China, but and a lot of people believe that the US government is trying to spy on them and really cares where they go. Maybe if you're a drug dealer or a finance guy or somebody that maybe is breaking the law, they care, but for the most part, our government, at least the United States, barely has enough resources to run the post office, let alone spy on everybody. Okay? So, yeah, you only do surveys when you have problems with it, and that's important. But actually, companies know that. A lot of, you fill out surveys when you have a bad experience, but you never fill out surveys when you have a good experience, do you? Some of you do. Some of you altruistic people that also, well, good people do, or people that have a lot of time do. But most of us, we don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or if it ain't broke, don't complain. Don't say anything about it unless it breaks. That's, your family's the same way too. It's like, why don't you tell me you love me? I love you, honey. But, if your boyfriend or your girlfriend would be the first one to complain when there's a problem. You snore a lot, or whatever. It's like, well, what about I mow the grass all the time for you? It's like, oh, well, yeah, sure. Well, thanks. Okay. You get the point? Anyway, I'm going to end it there. So start doing that homework between now and Friday. I'll fix it on the webpage so that it has the appropriate due date and how to submit it. And go download those programs, the Advanced IP Scanner, Advanced Port Scanner. Go have fun with them. Go try them in some different places, and you'll get interesting results. Maybe if you have a very closed network, a very small network, it won't give you much. So go to a Starbucks or go to a public place that has public Wi-Fi. Go do it at a Walmart parking lot and see what the heck you get. You'll get a lot of crazy stuff. Don't hack anybody, please. All right, if there aren't any questions, I will stop since it's literally 4 o'clock now and I got to get ready for my next class. So bye-bye. I'll post these videos later. Go Cougs.